We've explored how to load modules in the previous lectures, but now it's time to learn how to use an actual module. Throughout this course, we'll be using something called Webpack. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the Webpack site. Webpack describes itself as a module bundler. That's not very descriptive, so allow me to explain further. Gutenberg requires a lot of files in order for it to function correctly. As you progress through this course, you'll find that we'll have dozens of files created just for the front end. Loading all these files is bad practice as it can use up resources and hurt the performance of our site. Webpack solves most of this by combining all your files together. Let's say you had dozens of JS files for your plugin. Webpack will grab all those scripts and try to combine them into one or two files. It'll also take care of minifying and optimizing your code for you. Webpack can do so much more by also combining your styles and compressing your images. It can also create a web server for testing your site. On the site, you'll see that Webpack provides a simple diagram on how it works. On the left, you'll see various files needed for your code to work. This includes files from third-party frameworks and libraries. These files will be processed through Webpack, and as a result, you'll have fewer files that are ready to be used in production. You'll notice that it also processes different file types. So it's not just JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. Webpack takes a little bit of work to set up initially, but I promise you that it's very easy once you understand what's going on. I want to highlight that we won't be using all of Webpack's features. We don't need its server because we already have one. We don't need to compress images or process CSS files. We will solely focus on the JavaScript that Webpack can help us with. This is perfectly fine. You don't have to use Webpack to its full extent. A lot of the additional features are for developers who want to use Webpack with Node as the backend. Since we're using PHP and WordPress, we don't need those extra features. We just want help with the JavaScript code. Using Webpack is completely optional. However, as you may have noticed, I like to keep my code clean and organized. Webpack will really help us with organizing and scanning our code. I also want to use the latest JavaScript features which aren't available in modern browsers. This is something we'll explore more as the course progresses. Let's look at some examples. You don't have to follow along, just watch. Right now, I'm on a site called Strandberg Guitars. I'm going to open my developer tools and select the Network tab. We've talked about the Network tab before. It allows you to view the files loaded and how long it takes for those files to load. I'm going to filter the results to only display JavaScript. Then, I'm going to completely refresh the page and see what we get. As you can see, there are dozens of files being loaded and the site takes some time to load. Let's take a look at another example. I'm on the Udemy site now. I'm going to do the same thing as before. Open the developer tools and refresh the page. Right away, you'll notice one huge difference. There are way less files being loaded and the site is loading faster. You may or may not have noticed, but Udemy is a single-page app. Since it's a single-page app, it'll have hundreds and hundreds of files that should be loaded. However, the Udemy development team is very smart. If the developers use Webpack to combine all their files together, which reduces the amount of time to load their site. I can actually prove this further. If I click on one of these scripts, you'll see the preview appear on the right. You'll notice the code has the keyword Webpack. Webpack will load its own code to help you organize your code. If you take a closer look, you'll notice that this file contains libraries such as Angular and Angular Carousel. Usually, you would expect these to be in separate files, but with Webpack, we now have one individual file. This is the power of Webpack. Alright, let's get started with using Webpack. Right now, I'm inside a folder called Webpack-example. I want you to create a folder and name it whatever you want. I also want you to open your terminal and navigate to this directory. I'm using Visual Studio Code, so my terminal will automatically point to this directory. I'm going to run the command npm init. This is a subcommand that will help us generate a basic package file. You'll see what this looks like in a moment. After running this command, you'll be taken through a walkthrough to help you customize your package file. The first field is the name property. Node will usually recommend some default settings if you decide to leave these fields empty. I'm fine with the name, so I'm just going to press enter. It'll then ask for a version. I'm also fine with the default. Then you'll be asked to enter a description. Even though there is no default, this value is also optional, so I'm just going to keep moving forward. It'll then ask for the name of the entry point file. By default, this is set to index.js. Keep in mind that you can name your entry point file whatever you want. You can set this to app.js or even server.js. I'm going to keep it simple and just leave it at the default, which is index.js. The next property is the test command. Tests do exactly what they sound like. They will test your code for any bugs or errors. However, we won't be doing that, so we'll leave this empty. Git repository will also be empty since we won't be using Git. Keywords, author, and license will also be empty. You'll be asked if the settings you set are fine. I'm going to say yes and then press enter. Node will then generate a file called package.json. Open this file and view the contents. As you can see, all our settings are now saved. For the most part, a lot of these properties are unimportant to us as we won't be using Node heavily. We'll only be using it to help process and combine files. You'll notice we have this property called scripts where we can define our own commands. We'll take a look at this later, but you should be aware that it contains the test command we were asked to input earlier. Since we input nothing, it'll just have this default text saying there was no test command given. That's fine. We won't be using this anyway, so the default value is just fine as is. You are allowed to create this file manually, but I always prefer using the command as it makes sure there are no errors. The reason we need this package file is because we'll be installing and using various modules. The package file will save the modules we use and even keep track of the versions used. You won't be able to see the benefits in this lecture, but I assure you that it'll help us in the future. For now, just make sure you have it. Alright, now we can install Webpack. To install Webpack, you'll need to run the command npm install webpack --save-dev. Let's stop right here. For the most part, this isn't anything we haven't done so far. To install Webpack, we have to use the npm install webpack command. However, we also have this --save-dev text right after it. In this example, we're using the save dev flag. This flag tells Node that it should save this module inside the package.json file as it's a required module. You'll see what this looks like in just a moment. Alright, let's execute this command. Node will do its usual thing and install Webpack for us. Once Webpack is installed, you'll see the node_modules appear along with all the modules required to make Webpack work. I want you to open up the package.json file and you'll notice that there has been one change to the file. By using the save dev flag, Node will update the contents of this file by setting this property called dev dependencies. This property contains a list of all modules we have installed. The benefit of this is that we no longer have to worry about remembering the name of the module. I want to show you something. I'm going to delete the node_modules folder. Let's imagine that I'm moving my files from one system to another. Transferring modules can take a bit of time. To save some time, you may want to ignore those files. Luckily, you don't have to memorize all the names for each package. Instead, if you have the package.json file, then you can reinstall all the modules by just running npm install. If you don't specify a module to install, then Node will assume you want to install the dependencies specified inside the package.json file. I'm going to run this command. Just like that, I'll have Webpack installed again. Alright, there's one last thing I want to show you before we move on to configuring Webpack. There are two kinds of dependencies, production dependencies and developer dependency. Right now, we're using a developer dependency. Developer dependencies are modules that are only meant for development. Developer dependencies should not be used on a live site. Production dependencies, on the other hand, are meant to be used for live sites or projects. I'm going to delete my node underscore modules folder and remove the property dev dependencies. This time, I'm going to run the command npm install webpack -- save. There are two flags for saving dependencies. I'm going to run this command and then go over the differences. Once again, I'll have Webpack installed. Let's view the package.json file again. This time, a new property called Dependencies is created. This property will contain modules for production only. The dev dependencies will contain modules for development only. You can specify what modules should be for production or development by using either the save or save-dev flags respectively. For the most part, it actually doesn't matter in our project because we won't be using Node at all for the production part of the site. We're only using Node for development purposes, so I just use the save dev flag. I'm going to delete the node underscore modules folder again and remove the dependencies property. Then I'm going to run the npm install webpack -- save -dev command again. Alright, that was a long introduction, and I know it was a lot to go through, but that's the basics of getting started with Webpack. In the next lecture, we're going to begin configuring Webpack.